A little girl sang on the street, and the millionaire froze. It was the same lullaby his first love used to sing before she died. The city was alive that morning, filled with the sound of horns, footsteps, and hurried voices blending into one restless hum. People rushed by with cups of coffee and briefcases, their faces turned toward their screens or lost in their thoughts, unaware of the small figure standing on the corner near the old bookstore. She was a little girl, no more than 6 years old, with soft blonde hair curling around her face and a yellow sweater that looked one size too big for her. The wind lifted strands of her hair as she sang, her voice fragile yet piercing enough to cut through the noise of the city. There was something about the way she sang, not loud, not demanding attention, but pure, as though she wasn't singing for others to hear but to remember something important that the world had already forgotten. Andrew Hale, walking by with the measured pace of a man who owned every minute of his life, didn't notice her at first. He was the kind of man people recognized without quite knowing why, confident, composed, his light blue suit immaculate, his tie perfectly straight. In his hand, a phone blinked with unread messages, but his mind was far away. The morning had started like any other, meetings, reports, deadlines, the constant rhythm of a man at the top. But that sound, that voice, froze him mid-step. It wasn't the voice itself that stopped him, but the melody. A melody he hadn't heard in over 6 years. A melody that belonged to someone he had loved more than his own life. He turned, searching for the source, and his eyes landed on the little girl. She was singing the exact lullaby his first love, Lily, used to sing to him when the world seemed kind and simple. For a second, he wondered if he had imagined it, a cruel trick of memory brought on by exhaustion. But the words, the tune, even the small hum she made at the end of each verse were identical. Andrew stood there, unable to move, as the crowd flowed around him like water around a rock. When the song ended, she bent down to pick up a few coins people had dropped into the small paper box at her feet. Her fingers were red from the cold, and her sneakers looked worn down to the soles. She didn't notice the tall man watching her from a few steps away, his chest tightening with each breath. He walked forward slowly, unsure of what to say. When he was close enough, his voice came out quieter than he intended. "That song," he said. "Where did you learn it?" The girl looked up at him, her big blue eyes wide and curious, the same kind of innocent curiosity that once lived in Lily's eyes. "My mom taught me," she said. "She sings it to me before bed." "Well, she used to. She's sick now." Andrew felt something inside him break. He hadn't heard Lily's name in years, hadn't allowed himself to think about her. He had buried those memories under success, under the noise of work, under the pretense of control. But now, standing in front of this little girl, everything came rushing back. The nights they spent together in a tiny apartment, her laughter, the way she would whisper that lullaby into his ear when he couldn't sleep. And then, her disappearance, no explanation, no goodbye, only silence. He looked at the girl again. "What's your name?" he asked. "Emma," she said softly. "Emma Lewis." Lewis. The name hit him like a blow. Lily's last name. For a moment, he couldn't speak. His heart raced as thoughts collided in his head, but none of them made sense. Could it be possible? Could this child be? No, he couldn't even think it. He studied her face more carefully now, the curve of her nose, the light freckles on her cheeks, the exact shade of blue in her eyes. Every detail screamed of Lily. The girl tilted her head, frowning a little. "Are you okay, mister?" Andrew forced a faint smile. "Yes," he said. Your song surprised me." He reached into his coat pocket and handed her a bill, but she shook her head quickly. "No, thank you," she said, clutching her small box. "I'm not singing for money." I'm singing for Mom. She says music helps her heart remember. Those words pierced him deeper than he could explain. He wanted to ask more, where she lived, which hospital her mother was in, if her mother's name was really Lily, but something stopped him. It felt wrong to press. So instead, he said gently, "Do you want some hot chocolate? It's cold out here." She hesitated, then nodded shyly. Together, they crossed the street to a small cafe. He bought her cocoa and watched as she warmed her hands around the cup, blowing softly at the steam before taking careful sips. "It's really good," she said, smiling for the first time. Her smile was so much like Lily's that Andrew had to look away. For the rest of the day, that song wouldn't leave his head. He tried to work, tried to focus on numbers and meetings, but every note echoed inside him. By the time the sun began to set, he was back in his car, parked near the same corner, hoping to see her again. He didn't know why, maybe to hear the song once more, maybe to confirm what his heart already feared to believe. And when he saw her, the same little girl, singing again to a world that didn't stop to listen, he knew that this wasn't coincidence. Fate had finally brought him face to face with the truth he had been running from for years. The next morning Andrew woke up restless, his mind still replaying the song that had haunted him all night. He had barely slept, every moment filled with the sound of that familiar lullaby and the image of the little girl standing in the cold, her voice trembling yet full of emotion. He tried to convince himself that it was just coincidence, that the world was full of songs that sounded alike, that this couldn't possibly mean what he thought it did. But deep down, he knew better. There were too many details that didn't fit, too many pieces that connected in ways he couldn't ignore. He had spent years burying the memory of Lily, her laughter, her warmth, the way she made him believe that life was more than numbers and deadlines. When she left, everything inside him froze. And now, out of nowhere, a child with her voice, her eyes, and her name had appeared, as if the universe was forcing him to face something he had long denied. By noon, Andrew found himself back near the same street corner. He told his assistant to cancel his meetings and ignored the confused tone in her voice when she reminded him about the investor lunch he was supposed to attend. He didn't care. For the first time in years, something other than work mattered to him. He parked his car and waited. Hours passed. The cold wind grew stronger, the city busier, but there was no sign of the little girl. He was about to give up when he heard it again, that soft, trembling melody drifting through the crowd. He turned and saw her standing by a bakery, holding her small box, singing with her eyes closed as if the world didn't exist around her. He walked over slowly, not wanting to scare her. When she noticed him, her face lit up with a small, cautious smile. "It's you again," she said. "The man who bought me cocoa." Andrew smiled faintly, trying to appear calm though his heart raced. "Yes, it's me. You're singing again." She nodded. "I promised Mom I'd sing every day. She says it helps the angels hear us better." Her words were innocent, but they struck him with a quiet sadness. "And your mom, is she still in the hospital?" he asked gently. The girl nodded, her expression falling. "She got worse last night. I wanted to visit her, but they said kids can't come in right now." Her small fingers twisted together, and Andrew felt a familiar pain in his chest, the kind of helpless ache that comes when you see someone so small carrying more sorrow than they should ever have to. He knelt down to her level and asked softly, "Which hospital is she in?" The girl looked hesitant for a moment, then whispered, "Street Point Mary's." Andrew froze. He knew that hospital well, it was the same one where he had once visited Lily years ago when she worked there as a volunteer. The name alone sent a chill through him. "And what's your mom's name again?" he asked, already knowing the answer but terrified to hear it. "Lily," the girl said simply. "Lily Lewis." The sound of it hit him like a wave. His heart pounded so hard he thought it might break through his chest. It couldn't be. It had to be another woman, someone else. But as he looked at Emma's delicate features, her bright blue eyes that mirrored Lily's so perfectly, he knew the truth was standing right in front of him. "Would you like me to take you to see her?" he asked carefully, his voice trembling despite his best effort to keep it steady. Emma looked up at him uncertainly. "You can do that?" He nodded. "I can try." Her small face brightened, though her eyes were still guarded by years of quiet caution, as if she'd learned not to expect too much kindness from the world. She reached out her hand, and without thinking, he took it. Her hand was small, cold, and fragile in his. For a moment, he felt something shift deep inside him, a sense of purpose, of connection, of something he had lost long ago. The hospital was a 20-minute drive away, but to Andrew it felt like hours. Emma sat quietly in the passenger seat, clutching her small box of coins, her legs swinging restlessly. He glanced at her from time to time, noticing how she stared out the window with a strange mix of wonder and sadness. "Do you like singing?" he asked, just to fill the silence. She nodded. "I like it when Mom listens. She smiles when I sing, even when she's too tired to talk." Andrew swallowed hard. "You must make her very proud." Emma smiled faintly. "She says I sound like my dad. But I don't know him." Her words were soft, but each one felt like a blade cutting into him. He gripped the steering wheel tighter, the air in the car growing heavy. "What did she tell you about him?" he asked quietly. "Just that he was kind," she said. "And that he loved music. But she said he had to go away before I was born." When they finally pulled up to St. Mary's, Emma looked nervous. She fidgeted with the hem of her sweater and asked in a small voice, "Do you think they'll let me in?" Andrew smiled gently. "We'll make sure they do." He led her inside, the smell of antiseptic filling his lungs, each step heavier than the last. The receptionist looked up when they entered, and Andrew used his status, his name, and his calm authority to get past the restrictions. He told them Emma was his niece and that he was there to visit her mother. It wasn't a lie, not in the way that mattered. Within minutes, they were walking down the quiet hallway lined with hospital rooms. Emma clutched his hand tighter with every step, her small breaths trembling in the cold air. When they stopped in front of the door marked L. Lewis, Andrew felt his legs weaken. He stared at the name for a long time, unable to move, unable to breathe. Emma looked up at him with wide, trusting eyes and whispered, "That's my mommy." He nodded slowly, his throat too tight to speak. She pushed the door open quietly, and the sight inside shattered him. There, lying pale and fragile on the hospital bed, was Lily, the woman he had once loved more than life itself, the one he thought he would never see again. For a moment, everything around him disappeared, the machines, the lights, even Emma's small hand in his. All he could see was her. She turned her head slowly, her tired eyes meeting his, and in that instant, time stopped. "Andrew," she whispered, disbelief and recognition blending in her weak voice. He couldn't answer. He simply took a trembling step forward as the world, after all these years, finally came full circle. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The room seemed to hold its breath, filled only with the quiet beeping of the heart monitor and the faint hum of the hospital's fluorescent lights. Andrew stood frozen near the doorway, unable to move, unable to look away. Lily's face was thinner now, pale and fragile, but the moment her eyes met his, it was as if time folded in on itself. Every memory he had buried, every laugh, every touch, every night they spent dreaming of a future that never came rushing back all at once. She looked like someone fighting against both pain and disbelief, her trembling fingers gripping the edge of the blanket as though to make sure he was real. He wanted to speak, but his voice caught somewhere between his heart and his throat. It had been 6 long years since he last saw her, 6 years of trying to forget the only person he never could. Emma looked between them, confusion flickering in her wide blue eyes. "Mommy," she said softly, "this is the man who helped me come see you." Lily's eyes shifted toward her daughter, then back to Andrew, and something in her gaze changed. Her lips parted, trembling. "Emma," she whispered, her voice barely audible, "can you wait outside for a moment, sweetheart? I just need to talk to this man." The little girl nodded obediently and slipped out, closing the door quietly behind her. When it clicked shut, Lily's composure broke. She pressed her hands to her face and let out a sound that was somewhere between a sob and a gasp. "You shouldn't be here," she said weakly. "You shouldn't see me like this." Andrew took a hesitant step forward, then another, his chest tightening with every breath. "Lily," he said quietly, almost pleading, "I thought you were gone. I looked for you for years. No one knew where you went. You just—" His voice faltered as he tried to hold himself together, but the anger, grief, and longing that had been building inside him for so long finally began to spill out. "You disappeared without a word. I thought you didn't want me." Lily lowered her hands and met his eyes again. Tears traced thin lines down her cheeks, her voice soft and broken. "I wanted you more than anything," she whispered. "But I had to go. I didn't have a choice." Her words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken pain. Andrew frowned, confusion mixing with the hurt that still burned in him. "Didn't have a choice," he repeated quietly. "Lily, what are you talking about?" She hesitated, her breath catching as if even saying it out loud might shatter her completely. "Your father came to me," she finally said. "He told me if I didn't leave you, he'd destroy you. He said he'd make sure you lost everything, your career, your name, your future." I didn't believe him at first, but then he showed me things, documents, connections, things I didn't even know existed. He was powerful, Andrew. You know that. I was terrified. I couldn't let him ruin your life because of me. Andrew felt the air leave his lungs. His father had always been a ruthless man, obsessed with control, with the image of the Hale family and its legacy. But this went beyond anything he could have imagined. He remembered the months after Lily disappeared, how his father had refused to talk about her, how he had forced Andrew to focus on building his empire. The truth hit him like a wave, each word tearing through the years of silence that had stood between them. He stepped closer, shaking his head slowly. "You thought you were protecting me," he said, his voice raw. "And all this time I thought you just stopped loving me." Lily's lips quivered as she reached for his hand, her touch trembling but familiar. "I never stopped," she whispered. "Not for a single day. But I was alone, Andrew. I found out I was pregnant not long after I left, and I didn't know what to do. I couldn't go back. I didn't want your father to find out. So I kept moving, working whatever jobs I could. I thought I could give her a good life, but it was harder than I imagined. And then I got sick. I didn't want her to see me like this." Andrew sank into the chair beside her bed, burying his face in his hands. The room spun with everything he was hearing, the years of resentment, the loneliness, the endless questions he had asked himself about why she left. He had built walls around his heart, turned himself into someone who never looked back, someone who only cared about results and control, but now those walls crumbled, leaving him raw and vulnerable. He looked up at her again, his eyes glistening. "Lily, she's mine, isn't she?" She didn't answer with words. Instead, she nodded slowly, her tears falling freely now. "Yes," she said. "Emma is your daughter." The world seemed to stop for him in that instant. All the noise in his head faded, replaced by a single thought that repeated over and over, "I have a daughter." He leaned back in his chair, his hands trembling as he tried to process the truth. He thought of the way Emma smiled, the way her eyes shone when she talked about her mother, the way she had looked at him with trust even though she barely knew him. It all made sense now. Every instinct, every pull he had felt toward her was more than coincidence. He rose slowly, moving closer to Lily's bedside. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked softly, his voice full of hurt but no longer angry. "You could have written, called, something." Lily shook her head weakly. "I didn't want him to find you through me. I thought if I stayed away, he'd leave you alone. You had everything waiting for you, Andrew. I couldn't take that away." Andrew sat on the edge of the bed, his fingers brushing hers carefully, afraid she might vanish if he wasn't gentle enough. "You were everything," he said quietly. "Not the money, not the company, not the name. You. And now, I've wasted all these years not knowing that the two people I needed most were out there, trying to survive." Lily smiled faintly, though her eyes glistened with tears. "You found us," she said. "That's what matters now." But Andrew shook his head slightly. "No. It's not enough to find you. I'm not leaving you again." They sat there in silence for a long time, the weight of the past pressing heavily between them. Outside, Emma peeked through the small window in the door, watching her mother and the man who had unknowingly changed her life. She didn't understand everything that was happening, but she could sense something powerful, something good. Andrew looked at Lily again, his voice steady for the first time since walking into the room. "I'm going to fix this," he said. "I'll get you the best doctors, the best treatment. You don't have to fight alone anymore. I promise." Lily's eyes filled with gratitude and exhaustion all at once. She nodded slowly, whispering, "I just want her to have a chance at a better life." Andrew squeezed her hand gently. "She will," he said. "She's my daughter, she'll have everything she needs, everything I can give." But as he said the words, a quiet fear settled in his chest. He knew money and power couldn't erase the years of pain or heal what was already broken. Still, as he turned to look at the small figure waiting outside the door, he made a silent vow, he would not lose them again, not now, not ever. The following days passed in a haze that felt both heavy and surreal for Andrew. Every morning he drove to the hospital before sunrise, often sitting in the parking lot for several minutes before finding the strength to go inside. He wasn't used to feeling powerless. He had built his entire life around control over his business, his time, his emotions. Yet now, as he watched Lily lying in that hospital bed, pale and weak, and Emma drawing quietly in the corner of the room, he realized that some things could never be controlled, no matter how much money or influence he had. The doctors spoke in cautious tones, using words like stabilized and monitoring, but he could hear the uncertainty behind their professionalism. It terrified him in a way nothing ever had before. He spent hours talking to specialists, calling contacts, reaching out to the best medical experts he could find. His phone never stopped ringing, and yet he ignored every call that wasn't about Lily's condition. For the first time, his assistant heard him cancel board meetings without hesitation. The company, once the center of his existence, felt suddenly unimportant. All that mattered was the woman he thought he had lost forever and the little girl who had unknowingly filled the void she left behind. In the moments when Lily was asleep, Andrew would sit by her bedside, silently watching the steady rise and fall of her chest, afraid that if he looked away for too long, she might slip away again. Sometimes, Emma would curl up beside him, resting her small head against his arm. She asked questions he didn't know how to answer, about doctors, about recovery, about heaven, and each time he tried to find words that would keep her hope alive. One evening, as the fading sunlight spilled through the hospital window, Andrew found himself alone with Lily while Emma was downstairs getting a snack from the cafeteria. Lily's breathing was shallow but calm, and her voice, when she spoke, was quiet and almost distant. "You shouldn't keep coming here every day," she said softly. "You have a life to run. A company. People who depend on you." Andrew shook his head. "They can manage without me. You and Emma can't." She smiled faintly, though her eyes were full of sadness. "I never wanted to be the reason you lost yourself," she murmured. "You already gave up too much because of me once." He leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees, and stared at the floor for a long time before answering. "I didn't lose myself because of you," he said quietly. "I lost myself when you left. I became someone I don't even recognize, cold, mechanical, empty. And now, seeing you again, seeing her, it feels like I've been given a second chance. I'm not wasting it." Lily's eyes glistened as she reached for his hand. Her fingers were thinner now, weaker, but when he held them, he could still feel that familiar warmth that used to anchor him when life became too much. "Emma talks about you," she said after a moment. "She says you're kind. That you listen." A small laugh escaped her lips, fragile but sincere. "She doesn't even know who you really are yet, and still, she trusts you more than anyone." Andrew smiled faintly. "She's extraordinary," he said. "So full of light. You did that, Lily. You gave her everything I couldn't." She shook her head. "I gave her love, but not the life she deserves. You can give her that." Her words hung in the air like a plea, and Andrew felt something tighten in his chest. "Don't talk like that," he said, his voice trembling. "You're not going anywhere. I'll make sure you get better. You'll see her grow up. You'll be there." But Lily's gaze softened, and a single tear slipped down her cheek. "Andrew," she whispered, "you can't control everything. You've always tried to, but some things are meant to happen whether we want them to or not." He wanted to argue, to tell her that money could fix anything, that he would build a team of doctors around her if that's what it took. But as he looked into her tired eyes, he knew she had already made peace with something he wasn't ready to face. The thought of losing her again terrified him more than any risk he had ever taken in business. He tightened his grip on her hand as if holding her could somehow anchor her to the world. "Promise me," she said suddenly, her voice barely more than a whisper. "Promise me that if something happens to me, you won't let Emma feel alone. Promise you'll take care of her. That you'll tell her who you are when the time is right." He opened his mouth to speak, but the words caught in his throat. After a long pause, he nodded slowly. "I promise," he said, his voice breaking. "But you'll have to tell her with me. Because I'm not letting you go." Before Lily could answer, there was a small knock at the door, and Emma peeked in, holding a half-eaten cookie in one hand. "Mommy, can I stay here tonight?" she asked softly. Lily smiled weakly. "Of course, sweetheart." Andrew helped her climb onto the bed beside her mother, tucking her in gently. The sight of them together, mother and daughter, fragile and beautiful, made his heart ache with both love and fear. As Emma fell asleep, her small hand resting on Lily's arm, Andrew sat in silence, watching over them. The room grew dim as night settled in, but he didn't move. Every now and then, Lily would stir, whispering something too quiet to hear, and he'd adjust her blanket, afraid she might get cold. Hours passed before he finally stood up, stretching his stiff shoulders. He stepped into the hallway, rubbing his eyes, and found one of the doctors waiting for him. The man's face was calm but serious. "Mr. Hale," he began carefully, "I need to speak with you about Ms. Lewis's condition." Andrew's stomach tightened instantly. "Is it worse?" he asked, his voice low and controlled. The doctor hesitated before nodding slightly. She's stable for now, but her heart is weak. We're doing everything we can, but she'll need a procedure soon. It's risky, and she's hesitant to agree to it. She's worried about her daughter. Andrew clenched his jaw, fighting to keep his emotions contained. Do it, he said firmly. Whatever it takes. I'll handle the cost, the arrangements, everything. Just don't let her give up. The doctor nodded, sensing the desperation behind the man's calm exterior. When Andrew returned to the room, Lily was asleep with Emma curled against her, both of them breathing softly in the pale light of the monitors. He stood by the door for a long time, his chest heavy with the weight of promises and the fear of losing everything he had only just begun to find. As he watched them, he made a silent vow that if there was even the smallest chance of saving her, he would take it, no matter the cost. For the first time in his life, money wasn't about power or prestige. It was about redemption. It was about love. And as he stood there in the dim glow of the hospital corridor, he knew that nothing, not the company, not his reputation, not the expectations of the world, mattered more than protecting the fragile, miraculous family he had almost never known existed. The morning after the doctor's conversation with Andrew was cold and gray, the kind of day when the world seemed to hold its breath between hope and despair. Andrew arrived at the hospital earlier than usual, a cup of coffee untouched in his hand, his mind spiraling with thoughts of what the doctor had told him the night before. The idea of losing Lily again felt unbearable, yet he knew that without the surgery, her chances were slipping away. He had already called in several of the best cardiologists he could find, men and women who owed him favors or admired his work, but even their voices carried the same uneasy tone. The procedure was high risk, and Lily was weak. He paced the hallway outside her room, running a hand through his hair, his suit wrinkled from another sleepless night. For a man who built an empire out of precision, control, and logic, he was now facing a reality that followed none of those rules. When he entered the room, Emma was sitting cross-legged on the chair beside her mother's bed, drawing something with a red crayon on the back of an old piece of paper. Lily was awake, pale but smiling faintly as she watched her daughter. The sight was both beautiful and devastating. Andrew forced a small smile and greeted them softly. "Good morning," he said, setting the untouched coffee cup on the table. "How are my girls today?" The words slipped out before he could stop them, and both Lily and Emma looked up. Lily's eyes softened, while Emma giggled shyly, clearly liking the sound of being part of something that felt like a family. "We're okay," Lily said quietly. "Emma's been keeping me entertained with her stories." Emma held up her drawing proudly. "It's us," she said. "You, me, and Mommy. We're having ice cream in the park." Andrew took the picture carefully, staring at the three stick figures with round smiling faces, and something deep in his chest shifted. He wanted that picture to be real more than anything in the world. But beneath the quiet warmth, there was tension, the kind that lingered in every word, every silence. Lily knew he wanted her to have the surgery. She could see it in his eyes, the mix of determination and fear that made him look almost younger, almost human again. When Emma went to wash her hands, Lily turned to him. "You talked to the doctor," she said. "It wasn't a question." Andrew nodded. "He told me what needs to be done." "Lily, it's risky, but it's the only chance you have." She sighed softly, turning her gaze toward the window. "I know what he said. I just—" Her voice trailed off. "I don't want Emma to be alone if something goes wrong. She's too young. I can't leave her like that." Andrew stepped closer, his tone steady but gentle. "She won't be alone," he said. "I promised you. I'll take care of her. Both of you. But you have to fight for her, Lily. You can't give up now." Lily looked at him for a long moment, searching his face for something she could trust. There was a time when she believed in him completely, when she thought he could conquer anything. But life had shown her how fragile even the strongest people could be. "You've already done so much," she whispered. "You don't owe me anything." His expression hardened slightly. "Don't say that," he said. "You don't get to decide what I owe you. You and Emma, you're not some debt I can repay. You're my family, whether you want to believe it or not." The word family hung between them like something too sacred to touch. For a moment, Lily's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them away quickly. "I don't want Emma to grow up thinking she has to rely on others," she said softly. "I want her to be strong, independent. I want her to have the kind of life I couldn't give her." Andrew smiled faintly. "Then give her a mother who's alive to show her what strength looks like." There was a knock at the door, and the doctor stepped in with a clipboard in hand. "Good morning, Ms. Lewis," he said politely. "We'll need your decision soon. The earlier we operate, the better her chances." Lily nodded slowly, her fingers tightening around the blanket. Andrew watched her closely, his stomach twisting with dread as she looked from the doctor to him. "Can I have a few minutes to think?" she asked. The doctor agreed and stepped out, closing the door behind him. The silence that followed was thick. Lily took a deep breath and turned to Andrew. "If I do this," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "and I don't wake up, tell her about me. Tell her I loved her more than anything. And tell her I loved you too, even when I couldn't be with you." Andrew's throat tightened. He reached for her hand and held it firmly. "Stop," he said quietly. "You'll wake up. You'll tell her yourself. I'll make sure of it." Later that day, the hospital staff began preparing for the surgery. Emma stayed with Andrew in the waiting area, clutching her small stuffed bunny so tightly that her knuckles turned white. She didn't fully understand what was happening, only that her mother was going away for a while and that everyone kept telling her to be brave. Andrew sat beside her, his mind restless, his hands trembling slightly even though he tried to hide it. Every few minutes, Emma would look up at him and whisper, "She's going to be okay, right?" And he would nod, forcing a smile he didn't feel. "She's the bravest person I know," he'd say softly. "She's going to be fine." But inside, the uncertainty was eating him alive. When the nurse came to tell them the operation had begun, time seemed to slow. Hours passed like lifetimes. Andrew couldn't sit still. He stood, paced, sat again, then paced some more. Every sound in the corridor made him look up, every opening door sent a wave of dread through his chest. Emma eventually fell asleep with her head resting on his lap, her little hand still gripping the bunny. He brushed a strand of hair from her face, his heart aching with the weight of what he now knew, that this small child was his daughter, that her entire future might depend on what happened behind that sterile door. He thought of all the years he had wasted, chasing power, drowning in work, convincing himself that love was a distraction he couldn't afford. How wrong he had been. For the first time, his success felt meaningless. All the boardrooms, the deals, the accolades, none of it could buy what he wanted most now, another moment with Lily, another day with Emma smiling beside her. When the surgeon finally emerged, Andrew felt the blood drain from his face. The man's expression was unreadable at first, and Andrew's heart stopped. Then, after a long pause, the doctor spoke. "She made it," he said simply. "It was difficult, but she's stable. She's a fighter." The relief that washed over Andrew was overwhelming. He closed his eyes, letting out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding, his hands trembling. Emma woke up, confused by the sudden movement, and looked up at him. "Is Mommy okay?" she asked sleepily. Andrew smiled, a real, unguarded smile, and nodded. "She's okay," he whispered. She's going to be okay. When they were finally allowed to see her, Lily was still unconscious, but her face looked peaceful, her breathing steady. Andrew stood beside her, his heart full of gratitude and exhaustion. Emma climbed onto the edge of the bed, touching her mother's hand gently. "She's warm again," she said softly, as if it were a miracle. Andrew looked down at them, the woman he had loved and the daughter he never knew, and felt something he hadn't felt in years, a quiet, unshakable hope. He realized then that life had given him a rare gift, a second chance not just to love, but to be the kind of man who deserved that love. And as the faint winter light poured through the window, he made himself a silent promise: from this moment on, he would never let them face the world alone again. Lily's recovery was slow, but every day brought small victories that felt monumental to Andrew and Emma. The first time Lily opened her eyes and recognized them, Emma nearly jumped into her arms, crying with relief. Andrew stood quietly at the foot of the bed, his hands in his pockets, not trusting himself to speak. He had faced boardroom battles, market crashes, and media storms without blinking, but the sight of Lily awake and breathing broke something open inside him that he hadn't realized he'd been holding in for years. The doctors called her progress steady, but to Andrew it was nothing short of miraculous. He started spending more time at the hospital than at his office, ignoring calls from his partners, emails from investors, and endless questions from the media about why the CEO of Hale Industries had suddenly vanished from the public eye. For the first time in his life, he didn't care about appearances. The only thing that mattered was sitting in that small white room, watching Lily grow stronger and seeing Emma's laughter fill the sterile air with warmth. In the mornings, he would bring them breakfast, usually pancakes and orange juice for Emma, tea for Lily, and coffee for himself. Emma had started calling it family breakfast, and though Lily would smile at the term, Andrew could see that part of her was still afraid to believe in what they had become. She often watched him quietly, as if waiting for the moment he would decide to leave and return to the world that once demanded all of him. But he never did. Some nights, when Lily was asleep, Andrew would sit beside her bed, reading to Emma until she dozed off in the chair beside him. He would look at them then, the woman who had taught him how to feel and the child who had reminded him how to hope, and think that maybe life was giving him a chance to fix everything he had broken, not just with them, but with himself. One evening, as the hospital quieted down and the hum of machines faded into a steady rhythm, Lily asked him why he was still there. "You could have sent someone else," she said softly, her voice still weak but steady. "You have assistants, people who can take care of things. You didn't have to stay." Andrew leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, and looked at her for a long time before answering. "I want to stay," he said simply. "For once, I'm exactly where I want to be." She smiled faintly, her eyes softening. "You always were terrible at saying what you mean," she teased quietly. He chuckled under his breath. "Maybe. But I mean this. I don't want to lose you again, Lily. Or her." Her smile faded slightly as she turned her gaze toward the window, where the city lights shimmered beyond the glass. "You already lost me once," she said quietly. "And somehow, you still found me." He reached out and took her hand carefully, his thumb brushing over the scar where the four had been. "Then maybe that's what we're supposed to do," he said. "Find each other. Over and over, until we get it right." Days turned into weeks. Lily began walking again, slowly at first, with Andrew steadying her whenever she felt weak. Emma became the hospital's unofficial sunshine, chatting with nurses, handing out paper flowers she made from napkins, and making everyone smile. The three of them became a strange, beautiful sight, the powerful man in a tailored suit, the recovering woman with a quiet strength, and the little girl whose laughter healed everyone who heard it. One afternoon, the doctor came to see Lily and gave her the news they had all been waiting for. "You're strong enough to go home," he said with a smile. Lily blinked, tears welling in her eyes, and Emma clapped her hands in excitement. Andrew felt an overwhelming sense of relief wash over him. But when he asked where home was, Lily hesitated. "We don't really have one," she admitted softly. "I sold the apartment to pay for the first treatments before I came here." There was a long silence, and then Andrew said quietly, "Then come with me. I have space, too much of it, honestly. You and Emma can stay as long as you need." Lily looked uncertain. "Andrew, I can't just move into your life. People will talk." "And Emma?" He interrupted her gently. "Let them talk. I don't care about anyone's opinion but hers and yours." The next day, he drove them both to his home on the edge of the city, a vast modern house made of glass and light that had always felt cold and empty until that moment. As they stepped inside, Emma's eyes went wide. "It's like a castle," she whispered. Andrew smiled faintly. "A castle needs a princess," he said, and she giggled, spinning around in the entryway. For Lily, though, it was overwhelming. The sheer size of it, the silence, the perfection, it all felt like a reminder of how different their worlds had always been. She stood near the window, her hand resting on the glass, looking out at the city below. "I don't belong here," she murmured. Andrew came up beside her. "You belong wherever you want to be," he said quietly. "And I want you here." That night, for the first time in years, Andrew's home was filled with life. Emma explored every room, leaving a trail of giggles and scattered crayons in her wake. Lily cooked dinner in the massive kitchen, laughing when she realized she didn't know where anything was. Andrew watched her from the doorway, the warmth of the moment hitting him with quiet force. The three of them sat down to eat together at the long table that had been empty for far too long. The food was simple, pasta and salad, but it tasted better than any meal Andrew could remember. As they ate, Emma chattered endlessly about how she wanted to plant flowers in the garden and paint her own room pink. Lily smiled, her eyes meeting Andrew's across the table. "She's happy," she said softly. He nodded. "So am I." When Emma went to bed that night, Andrew and Lily sat in the living room, the city lights flickering through the windows. She looked tired but peaceful, her color returning, her strength coming back little by little. "It feels strange," she said after a while. "Being safe. Being cared for." Andrew looked at her, his voice low. "You deserve it, Lily. Both of you do." She hesitated, then asked quietly, "And what about you? Do you?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he leaned back and sighed. "I don't know," he admitted. "But maybe I'm starting to." For a long time, they sat in silence, the air between them heavy with unspoken memories and new beginnings. It wasn't perfect. There were still wounds that hadn't healed, still things unsaid. But as Andrew looked at her, really looked at her, he realized that for the first time in years, he wasn't chasing success or redemption. He was chasing something far more fragile and far more real, the possibility of a life built not on power, but on love, forgiveness, and the quiet, astonishing strength of starting over. Weeks passed, and the rhythm of their new life began to settle into something that felt almost normal. The mornings were filled with laughter and small arguments over who got the last pancake, the afternoons with Emma running through the garden while Lily sat on the porch sketching or reading, and the evenings with quiet dinners that always seemed to end in conversation and soft smiles. For Andrew, it was a reality that felt almost too fragile to be real, as if any moment he might wake up and find himself alone again in the cold emptiness of his penthouse office, surrounded by silence and regret. But every time he came home and heard Emma's laughter echo through the halls or saw Lily waiting by the window, those fears would fade. It was in those small, ordinary moments that he began to understand what happiness really meant, not perfection, not wealth, not success, but the simple, breathtaking grace of being loved and needed. Still, underneath the calm surface, a quiet storm was brewing, one that neither of them wanted to face yet. Lily was healing, her body growing stronger each day, but there were nights when she would wake up pale and trembling, clutching her chest as if afraid it might stop again. She tried to hide it from Andrew, not wanting to worry him, but he noticed. He always noticed. One night, when she thought he was asleep, he found her sitting on the edge of the bed in the dark, breathing unevenly, tears on her cheeks. Without a word, he sat beside her and wrapped his arms around her. She didn't resist, but she didn't speak either. They stayed like that for a long time until she whispered, "I'm scared, Andrew. Not of dying, I've made peace with that, but of leaving her. Of her forgetting me." His grip on her tightened. "She won't forget you," he said quietly. "Neither will I. And you're not going anywhere. You're getting stronger." She shook her head slightly. "You don't know that." He exhaled slowly, his voice low and firm. "Then I'll fight it for you. Like I should have fought for us back then." The next morning, Lily pretended as if nothing had happened. She smiled, made breakfast with Emma, and laughed when the little girl accidentally spilled juice all over the counter. But Andrew could see the exhaustion in her eyes, the way her hands trembled slightly when she reached for her cup. It terrified him, that even now, when everything seemed perfect, he could still lose her. That day he made a decision. He called one of the best private doctors in the country, someone he trusted, and arranged for regular home visits. Lily protested at first, saying it was unnecessary and expensive, but Andrew refused to listen. "If it keeps you safe, it's worth it," he said simply. Over time, she stopped arguing. Maybe because she was tired, or maybe because deep down, she wanted to believe he could protect her from everything, even the things beyond his control. Meanwhile, Emma had begun asking questions, innocent at first, but growing sharper each day. One evening she looked up from her drawing and asked, "Mommy, why does Andrew live alone if he's so nice?" Lily hesitated, glancing at Andrew, who was sitting nearby reading. Before she could answer, he lowered his book and said gently, "Because I was waiting for the right people to live with." Emma frowned, thinking it over. "Like us?" she asked. He smiled. "Exactly like you." She seemed satisfied with that answer and went back to her drawing, but Lily's eyes stayed on him for a long time afterward, filled with something complicated, gratitude, fear, and the beginnings of something she hadn't felt in years, love that didn't hurt. The bond between Andrew and Emma grew stronger with each passing day. He took her to school in the mornings, helped her with homework in the evenings, and listened patiently when she told him long, winding stories about her imaginary friends. The staff at the company began noticing changes in him too, fewer late nights at the office, a softer tone in his voice, a calmness that replaced the relentless edge he used to carry. His assistant once remarked, half joking, "Whatever happened to you, sir, I hope it never stops." Andrew only smiled in response. The truth was, he finally had something worth coming home to, something real and pure that no amount of power could ever replace. But the peace didn't last forever. One afternoon, while Andrew was in a meeting, he received a call from the housekeeper. Lily had collapsed while walking in the garden. He left the office without a word, his heart pounding harder with every mile between him and home. When he arrived, he found her sitting on the couch, pale and trembling, with Emma clinging to her side, crying. "I'm fine," Lily insisted weakly, but her voice shook. Andrew knelt beside her, his face tight with worry. "You're not fine," he said. "You're going back to the hospital." She shook her head stubbornly. "No hospitals. I can't live like that again. I just want to be here, with her." Her voice broke as she looked at Emma. "With both of you." Andrew felt torn between fear and helplessness. He wanted to force her, to make her go, but one look at her eyes, calm, pleading, certain, stopped him. "Please," she whispered. "No more hospitals. Just let me live." That night, after Emma fell asleep, they sat together on the balcony, wrapped in silence. The city lights shimmered below them, reflecting off the glass walls like stars that had lost their way. Lily leaned against his shoulder, her head resting just below his chin. "You know," she said quietly, "when I was younger, I used to think love was about promises. People swore they'd never leave, never change, never hurt you. But that's not love. Love is showing up anyway, even when you're scared. It's staying when everything falls apart." Andrew listened, his chest tightening with emotion. "Then I love you," he said simply. "Because I'm not going anywhere. Not this time." She smiled faintly, her hand finding his. "You already did," she whispered, "but somehow, you came back." They sat there for hours, the world around them fading into quiet stillness. For the first time, neither of them tried to fill the silence with words. It was enough just to exist in that fragile moment, together, breathing the same air, knowing that everything they had endured had led them here. When Lily finally stood to go inside, she turned to him and said softly, "If anything happens to me, tell Emma that love isn't about forever. It's about right now. And right now, I'm happy." Andrew wanted to tell her to stop talking like that, to promise her that nothing would happen, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, he kissed her forehead and whispered, "Then let's make right now last as long as we can." That night, long after Lily had fallen asleep, Andrew stood by the window, staring out at the city lights. His reflection looked different now, older, softer, human in a way he hadn't been in years. He realized that he wasn't afraid of losing control anymore. He was afraid of losing what gave his life meaning. And as he looked toward the bedroom, where Lily slept peacefully beside the daughter he never knew he had, he made himself a silent vow. Whatever time they had left, he would make it count. He would give them everything he had, not because he owed them, but because they were his reason to live. The first day of spring arrived with a softness that felt almost unreal. The air was warmer, the trees outside the house were budding with new life, and the sound of Emma's laughter echoed through the garden like music. Andrew stood on the balcony, watching her chase a butterfly, her golden hair catching the sunlight. For a moment, everything seemed perfect, as if the pain of the past months had finally loosened its grip on them. Lily was sitting in a chair by the window, wrapped in a light blanket, her face calm and bright in the morning light. She had regained much of her strength, though she still tired easily, and the shadows beneath her eyes told a quieter truth than her smile ever could. Andrew came inside, holding a cup of tea, and set it gently on the table beside her. "You're glowing today," he said with a half-smile. She looked up at him, amused. "That's the sunlight, not me." He shook his head. "No, it's you. You look like you belong to this day." She smiled faintly and turned back toward the window. "Maybe I do," she murmured, her voice soft, almost wistful. They spent the afternoon together in the garden. Lily sat on the grass while Emma braided flowers into her hair, and Andrew joined them later, still in his crisp shirt but barefoot, a rare sight that made both of them laugh. They ate sandwiches and strawberries, and for a few precious hours, it felt like they were living inside a memory that hadn't happened yet, one where pain didn't exist and time stood still. Lily leaned back on her elbows, watching the clouds drift lazily across the blue sky. "Do you ever think about what happens next?" she asked suddenly. Andrew glanced at her. "Next?" She nodded. "After this. After everything. When life goes back to normal." He hesitated, then said quietly, "I don't think it ever will. I think this is our new normal."